So I'm John Lester, and I'm a professor at Old Dominion University in the Civil Engineering Technology program, and I've been there since 2009. And I've always used Excel in my class because when you calculate something, especially for engineering, and you do it over and over again, it's easier to check it with an Excel spreadsheet. So if you look at my solutions on my personal computer, I've got every homework, every question from a quiz, every question from an exam. They're all done in Excel just to make sure I've done the math correctly. And I've told my students that over the years, hey, you need to use Excel because it's going to be very helpful to you. And it's one of those things that they initially were hesitant, fought me. They're like, well, I'm never going to use that. I was like, well, I hate to tell you, but if you don't use Excel in engineering, you're going to need to learn the phrase, would you like biggie fries with it? Because you're not going to be in engineering long. So I literally started an assignment, and I don't know how many years ago, but it was just an Excel based, and I gave them. As a matter of fact, I can show you what I'm talking about if you let me. I'll share my screen and bring up a document. And you can see I literally would hand this to the students, and it's homework number one, and it asks them to create a spreadsheet, and it's fairly simple and straightforward. I wanted them to calculate the diameter of a circle from 9 inches to 36 inches every 3 inches. Then I wanted them to calculate the volume of a pool, and something like calculating the centroid of a figure, doing linear interpolation, solving for the value of X. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't see a solve button. And so I had to walk them through how you do the goal seek. And then using calculus. And a lot of students are like, well, there's no calculus button on Excel. I'm like, no, there's not. But what do you do once you get the integration? It's just math. So I've showed them how to do that in a little tutorial. And so I have a couple questions like that. And then, just simple trigonometry. What's the side of that? And they know the answer. It's a 3, 4, 5 triangle. So they know the answer is going to be 9. But I want to see their calculations to do, did they use Pythagorean theorem? And then some more trigonometry of, can they use, the correct coding for an Excel spreadsheet to calculate what's that value of H if you have 14 degrees on a base of 48 inches. And then the last one, which I found was very interesting, years and years ago, I've had students saying, hey, what do I need to make on the final exam to get a B in the class?
Hmm.
And so I would tell them, well, okay, here's your grades. And so I've put this in there and told them, here's your grades. Just these are Johnny's grades. If you calculate, based on these percentages, what is that letter, what is that number grade? What's the average? And
Mhm,
then I give them
mhm.
an if then, hey, if you drop the lowest and the highest homework, what's the final letter grade? So
Mm,
they have to do the calculation, they have to put the if then statement, and then they also have to use the grade schema to determine that an 89.4 is a
mhm,
B, but an 89.5 is a B plus, so forth and
mm,
so so I did that, and I was able to. So that's pretty much all I wanted to share. I literally asked them to do all that type stuff, and they submitted it, and I would look over their answers, and I would see that okay, they got this right, they got that wrong, and so forth and so on. And then I started, nitnoid looking into their Excel spreadsheets to determine, okay, did they calculate it the way I wanted them to? And so I would have to, take off half a point for that one because yes, they got the right answer, but they literally just typed in the number. They did the
mhm,
calculation over here on the side with their calculator, which they've been doing for years.
mm.
And I'm trying to show them that, okay, look, it's easy to calculate the area of a circle, but if you have to do it 10 times, that gets old doing the same calculations and writing it down, doing the calculation, writing it down, doing it,
Right.
teach them the copy and paste. So they've
Mhm,
gotten used to doing that.
mm,
And the other thing that was frustrating is I would have to change, that was version B. Well, the next year I would use version C. So I would have, you know, 10 different versions. I would rotate from year to year the different answers, but every student in fall of whatever year would get the exact same 10 questions.
mm,
And then the next year they would get a different set, but everybody in summer school would get the same one. So I
mhm,
couldn't vary anything. And so if one person got it right, they would spread it to everybody. So
mhm, mhm,
now with ExPrep, I can let the portal do that grading, and I can upload, if I have 10 students, I can load 10 versions.
mhm,
So it makes it much more difficult for them to cheat. And when they hand jam a value in there, instead of me having to go and look at that cell, the portal does it for me and says, okay, did they reference this cell and did they reference that cell to get their answer? They may have the right value, so they get, you know, half a point for that, but it takes off if they didn't do it the way I wanted them to.
Mhm.
So it makes it kind of intuitive for them that they know that they need to do it a certain way, they need to get a certain answer, and they understand how to do that.
Mhm.
So that was my first, just one homework, and I did that the first year, and I forgot what year it was. Um, and then I realized how good it was, so I expanded and did, homework 19, homework 20, and homework 6. I had a total of four homeworks in the very same type of scenario. Um, and then I've since added 12 labs. So I've got a total of 16
Wow.
assignments in ExPrep. And the labs used to be literally, we would go do an experiment. They would take their data, they would calculate it, they would put it in a lab report. And I would see a little table that had, here's their data that they took, here's their calculations, and here's their final answer.
Mhm.
And I had no idea if they knew how to get it correct.
Mhm.
So now I make them do that and submit a spreadsheet so I can literally, let ExPrep do the grading and determine, did they do use the right formula? Did they reference the right cell? Did they get the right value? Did they know how to do what I'm asking to do? And it's mundane and repetitive because you take 10 data samples and you have to do 10 calculations in this column, 10 calculations in this column, and then you got to take an average. So it's repetitive stuff, but it's very good using Excel for stuff like that. And now I'm also teaching a soils lab, so I've actually expanded to a second class, and so instead of doing just fluids lab, I actually do the soils testing lab. So the same type of process, they used to do the calculations and put it in a report, and I would see their table, but I didn't know if they
Mhm.
got it right. So now
Mhm.
I'm doing the exact same thing in my Excel or my soils lab to determine, do they know how to do it, and then that's part of their lab report. So instead of just grading their lab report and giving them a score out of 10 and that's all they do, now they do the calculations and that counts a certain percentage of their grade, and then they do the lab report, which is a completely separate thing. you know so again, I've had some bugs to work out, and I've made a few minor changes along the way, but it keeps getting better and better as I deploy a group of assessments in the portal every year. And I did have a document that I wanted to share with you from a student.
Mhm.
I will try to share that,
Okay.
and it's pretty telling. Of course, I've redacted. I've redacted his name and email and phone number and everything
Mhm.
else,
Mhm.
but he asked a simple question. I gave him an answer, but he told me thanks for the feedback, and it was one of those aha moments. And
Mhm.
he's an adult learner. He's probably my age and works as a construction inspector in upstate New York.
Mhm.
And it's kind of nice to see that he now sees how incredibly useful Excel is for not just engineering stuff, but everything.
Mhm.
And then I've never had a student thanks for challenging me in the class to be a better engineer. So that was pretty telling. And I told him the story about, how you can use Excel for not just, if then that, but I told
Mhm.
him, in calculating scores or doing different things, classifying certain things, how you can
Mhm.
use Excel for stuff like that. So I like to share stuff like that because it's pretty telling when you see something like that, to know that he gets it or he understands what we're doing. So that was pretty neat, and I thought I would share that. So.
Yeah, and that's what we're here for. I am also an instructor, and so that's what we're here for is to add value to others as they go along their journey. And the feedback like that, it's probably one in 100 students who give us feedback like that.
Absolutely.
We usually only hear from the ones who are upset with us, but it's nice to get that. And you touched on a couple of different things. You mentioned the different versions that you can upload for assignments, exams, and that kind of thing. But also, we have a unique identifier embedded in our worksheets so that if
Hmm.
students try to cheat,
Yeah.
we would know that they did, and not only that they did, but who they cheated off of. And so
Right.
that has been something that in some instances, we've had students who were using their friend who took the class last year. But we knew that they were using that friend who used it last year, and so
Right. And
that's also
it's
been helpful.
and I've told him up front. I was like, look, you can try to cheat, but and my nephew was a business major at
Mhm.
a school in the Southeast Conference, and he told me, he says, Uncle John, there's no way you can prevent cheating. He said, if you put a spreadsheet out there and that's one of your assignments, they're going to cheat. And I was like, all right, that's fine. And I showed him what I was doing. He's like, dude, that's pretty sick. He said, there's no way I said, yeah, you can't get around it. I said, and I told him the story that, look, you get assigned version A or version C, and it's different than all the others. And,
Mhm.
once you get assigned that version, you have to submit that version. You can't
Mhm.
go and just grab a random one and give the answers because, like I told him what you just said, that they know and it gets flagged.
Mhm.
And it's and another thing I've told them, I'm like, look, if there's a blue cell with yellow highlighting, do not change that value, because I've had some students, they went and changed the given values, and it messed them up, and they're like, why'd I get a zero on this? I was like, well, you changed all the given values, you created a whole new assignment.
Right. Right.
And so I've had to tell them, here's what you got, do the calculations on what you've got.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and the version control, I do that with everything now:
Mhm.
homeworks, quizzes, exams. I don't just give one um exam. I give, I don't know how many versions of each question I have, because I've been doing it so long, and I'll add a different version, I'll change some things around,
Mhm.
and of course, with depending on what LMS you have, you can do that. And I've learned how to use either pools or banks depending on what LMS you have.
Mhm.
And it's the same setup or principle in XPrep by putting a zip file that has 10 different versions. So
Mhm.
it's very good. And of course, students, they'll ask me a generic question, and I'm like, okay, which version do you have? And they're like, oh yeah, that's right. I said, I've got 12F1. I'm like, okay, so I'll go look at 12F1 and make sure that that's what they're doing, instead of just giving them a random answer, which is may not be the one that they're looking for.
Right.
Uh,
And you also mentioned that, it gets better. It gets better every semester as you go
mhm.
along. I think that one thing that I try to stress is that that first semester is the most difficult, because not only are the professors learning the system and how to work with our team and how we set things up, but you also have to give the learning curve. We have to learn how you want things, how you want to see it, what you want us to grade for, what the particulars are, and then we have to set everything up, because this is all customized based on what you want. And
Right.
so people have to give themselves that grace. And I think when you get to the status where you're an instructor or professor, you kind of feel like you should know.
Hmm.
And you don't necessarily want to give yourself that grace in that room, but
Right.
it's really important for people to just say, this is new, let me just give it its time and figure this out. And so I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And of course, students are gonna complain. They're like, well, why'd you take off for this? And I was like, well, because you didn't, do it the right way, or you use the wrong cell, or whatever. And then they're like, oh, okay. And yeah, I get there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak, or there's more than one
Hmm.
way to calculate something. But I'll
Hmm.
tell them, hey, the best way to calculate the average of a set of values is not just
Hmm.
adding them up and dividing by the number, because that number may change. But if you highlight and say the average of the top cell to the bottom cell,
Hmm.
that's the best way, and that's how I want you to do it. And I've showed them a couple different ways of calculating percent error. And
Hmm.
I said, you have to take this value minus this value and divide it by that one. Calculate that, take the absolute value, and then put it into a percent format. So it's one of those things that it's going to evolve, and hopefully it teaches them good habits. I know that
Hmm.
the consulting engineers will are very appreciative of when they get a student that has good habits and how to calculate stuff and how to do a spreadsheet. It's not just a black box. You don't just put your numbers in and it spits out the answer. You have to make sure that you understand how to do the calculation and how to write the calculation in the Excel to do
Hmm.
what you want to do. So
All right. Perfect. Well, is there anything before we close out that you feel like is important to share with other professors?
think the only thing I could probably say is that it lets you do stuff above and beyond what you thought you could do. And I'm not a fan of grading stuff. I let automation grade stuff, and if you have a class size of 30 or more, it's difficult to look at every single student's submission. And
Mm-hmm.
I've got 25 homeworks, 7 quizzes, a midterm and a finals, and 12 labs. So you can rattle
Yeah.
off the. So at some point, I've got to let technology help me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's one of those things that the students understand that, hey, look, this guy's got 30 students and 42 different assignments. He can't spend 10 seconds on every single question.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, automation's got to take over, and it's kind of the way things are going now. Advanced classes, it's a different animal. I want to
Mm-hmm.
see their packet, and I've only got
Right.
15 students in that, and I will literally look at every single thing, and they're right up in their calculations, and for a design problem.
Mm-hmm.
But for simple calculations of what's the flow rate in the pipe, the automation of using um, ExPrep to do that is very good. And I literally can see that, okay, the student's got 100 on this, or if they did get a bad score, they can
Mm-hmm.
look at their feedback. And that's one thing that I've evolved over the how many ever years I've been using this, that the feedback was very helpful. Instead of just saying, no, you got it wrong. Okay, well, why'd I get it wrong? Well, now
Right.
okay, you got it wrong because you didn't use the pi function, or you didn't reference the right cell. So it helps the students become better spreadsheet writers. So it's going to save you some time. It's going to let you do things you couldn't do before
Mm-hmm.
ExPrep, and that's the neat thing. And it's not just engineering. Business people use Excel, like they breathe. So
Yeah.
I know that we're not the only ones using Excel out there, and so that's the good thing, is it's sending people out into the real world that know how to use Excel better, because they followed a certain protocol and way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay,
Well, thank you so much for your time, John. We appreciate it.
you bet. Take care.
You
Enjoy the
too.
rest of the week. All right.
You too. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.